Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of mass migration, but as the subtext or the context even of that is cultural integration or cultural compatibility, I guess. Now, whenever there are migrants, and they can be a large number, by the way, but where the cultural compatibility is high, then the integration rate is very swift. And this can play out a number of fronts. When they're culturally compatible, the incoming migrants, they tend to have more or less the same or very similar values to the host population. They can compete directly for jobs. They can they can go, which means that the system of merit for hiring stays in place. There's no special affirmative action or DEI or race gender quota carve-outs that so undermine and crush new wealth creation in the West that we're seeing, of course, all around us now. So these people can fit into the existing order of merit. Now they can, their children will, assuming they've got young children, they will become, and I'll use Australia as the baseline on this for the moment, but that they'll become Australian within that generation. If say, I don't know, like a 5-year-old kid or something arrives from another English-speaking country, for example, by the time they're an adult, they'll be Australian, and it'll happen. Within that a decade or two, they'll be close to fully Australianised. Now, they don't need special handouts. They don't need special government. They don't have special. They don't want special representatives representing them uniquely. And look, every group in Australia, the migrant group, Indians in particular, Arabs as well, but Indians in particular, Chinese too. They want special. We have to have our community. Our community has to have special political representatives in the parliament. We have to have special allowances for us, special handouts, special pleadings, special for our community, because they're not integrating. They, in many cases, don't want to integrate. Their culture is so alien that they want to keep their own culture and keep their separateness, while all the time accusing everyone else of being racist and Nazi and whatever. Whereas high levels of cultural compatibility, those issues simply don't arise. The community cohesion is maintained, pretty much is maintained. Now, there might be some minor issues, like in the old days, there'd be the Irish Catholics coming to Australia, and that would be a bit of pushing and shoving over that, and that was considered a big deal, much bigger deal than it is today. Back in the time, hundreds of years ago, this is not an issue, of course. Now, so cultural compatibility is very important, and people, I think migrants should be selected on a basis of cultural compatibility score. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be outliers. For example, there may be an Indian rocket scientist who's a devout Hindu, an Indian rocket scientist who's the foremost rocket scientist genius in the world, and he wants to come and live in Australia or migrate to Western country. This guy's got skills that are at the very apex of the worldwide global skills index. So why not? Why not? If he wants to bring his skills to Australia, I don't have a problem with that. Now, there's only going to be a handful of people worldwide who would meet that criteria, but nonetheless. So in that situation, the cultural compatibility, we can kind of let that go. But the reality also is that someone like that will be very urban. They'll be educated in Western universities to a Western standard. Their wife will be also, part of that sort of global standard of things. The children will be. So the chances are reasonably high that at the very least, economically, they're going to fit into, as migrants fit into the country. Culturally, maybe not. Maybe they'll take longer, but economically, definitely. So some allowances for small numbers, and they have to be small. Now, once you've only got small numbers of those people coming in, they can't go off in Indian enclaves and in little Hindu enclaves and this sort of thing. They'll be so widely dispersed around Australia amongst, the host population that they will have a lot of trouble being, no, they can still do it and still will do it actually, but they've got a fair bit of trouble having this uniquely Hindu nationalist, Indian nationalist separate. The likelihood is that their children will probably marry maybe local born Indians, and then by a few generations on, they'll be marrying local half Indians, white people, and they'll be integrating in the wider society. So integration still happens there. It just takes a bit longer. Now, let's say look at somewhere like Germany, where if you're going to go to the highest levels of cultural compatibility and also language compatibility, you would say, well, any migrant to Germany has to come from like Holland, Luxembourg, somewhere around maybe in France, Alsace, where a lot of people speak German. There's a lot of German heritage there, or Austria, Swiss, the German part of Switzerland, the southern areas around Denmark, around that wider Schleswig-Holstein area, and also say areas around the Polish-German border. A lot of people speak German, good German there, and so on. So you would look at the areas where the if you like, the Germanic, the wider Germanic social value system exists. You say, well, anybody wants to emigrate to Germany from those places, fine. We'll give you the big rubber stamp type thing. But if you want to come from an area outside of that, then you're in the next tier down. You have to be offering something of real value to the host society you want to emigrate to. So say somebody wants to come from England, for example. Somebody wants to come from England and emigrate to Germany. Well, if that's the case, then they need to do some pretty intensive German language classes, and they have to show what value they're going to bring: qualifications, credentials, business experience, capability that's going to add value to the. So they've got a tougher gig. They've got a higher bar to meet. So as your cultural compatibility declines or diminishes, then the value you must bring to the society must proportionally increase. Even if you're from somewhere not far away, like England to Germany, there's still a lot of cultural compatibility there, but not the same as if you're from Austria or again, Swiss, the German part of Switzerland and Holland, and so like Dutch and German is, they can pretty much understand, not the same by the way, but they can pretty much understand each other. A lot of similarity, not the same, but a lot of similarity. The chances of integrating is quite high. Now the Germans might complain, well, gee, we don't like the sort of rope-wurst, the sausage and so on that the Dutch eat, but that's not exactly a big deal. So now culinary aficionados and despots may think it is, but generally those people are going to integrate fairly well. Now there's some cultural difference, say, between a Latin language and an Anglo language. So the French may not integrate in Germany as well, or in England for that matter, as well as say somebody from Spain or Italy may integrate into another Latin area. Spain going, Spaniards going to Italy, the compatibility there is fairly high. The languages, I speak passable Spanish, or did, it's rusty now, and I found going around Italy, my Spanish was good enough. They might look at me and pull faces, but they could understand me, and I them. If they would speak slowly, if they went quickly, I couldn't. The areas of compatibility cultural compatibility must be the first tier, I believe, must be the first tier of migrants. And then the migrant benefits, the host country benefits, integration is swift, and so on. Now, the next tier, as I say, it can be somewhat compatible, but must require additional skills. But as you move down the cultural compatibility stack, how culturally compatible Chinese with, say, Australian Not very much. How culturally compatible are Indians? Not very much. Indians have the benefit of, or some do anyway, of the language, particularly the Brahmins, the upper class. Then you go to, say, Islamic peasant type societies like Bangladesh and places like that. Compatibility is very low, cultural compatibility, but also the capacity of these people to deliver additional benefits, such as to the host country they want to come in to deliver additional benefits, such as a high quality of education, urban living. Maybe they're Christians, as in some people from India, like Dinesh D'Souza in the United States, as I understand it, at least, was a Christian. D'Souza from the old Portuguese colonial Catholic type conversions. I was at around Goa and around there when the Portuguese first fronted up with their trading missions. So now this is, of course, hasn't happened. Now, if I look at Australia, it hasn't happened in the sense that the people that are culturally completely incompatible are also having no other sort of rebalancing benefits, such as education, or their geniuses, or they bring great skills. So we're getting nothing. We're getting culturally completely incompatible people who are also low IQ peasants from the third world. I mean, what the fuck are they bringing to the table? Well, nothing is the answer. And this is where the problem particularly comes. In fact, pretty much all the problems come from this. Well, most, if not all. So if we're going to repair the immigration system, it needs to switch around from just masses of peasants to cultural compatibility. Now, I saw firsthand as a kid. I briefly went to a school. My folks were getting their place extensively remodeled and renovated, so we ended up moving to they wanted to save their pennies, so I moved to a cheaper area. So I went to a school that was, to say the least, multicultural. I didn't mind it. I didn't really think about it, and but get to school, I noticed how differently the brown people behaved. And that was quite stark. Now, did I care that they were brown? Well, no. Did I care that their behavior was different? Well, yes, I did. And they were very different sort of people, and very different attitudes. They had different attitudes to violence, different attitudes to self-behavior and self-control. And they were, I thought, very difficult to deal with. Not every one of them, I wouldn't say, but gee, pretty much. They would steal anything that wasn't nailed down, because they thought that, if I'm at school and you've got the stuff here, we own it. It's ours. We've come from a rural village in the Middle East somewhere, and we share everything. Why can't I just take whatever I want? And these attitudes, and they were quite. They didn't believe that doing something wrong and getting punished. They didn't believe, well, all I have to do is stop doing that wrong thing, then I won't get punished. They didn't perceive it that way. They quite uniquely saw it as, I just have to be better at getting away with it. I just had to be more deceitful, more underhanded, more treacherous and rat cunning, slimy. That was their view, and they very much held it. And the sort of things they did that they enjoyed, and I've mentioned these before in other videos. These people, and they're bear in mind they're children here. They would smoke at the age of 11 years old, and they had flick knives, something I'd never seen before. I was saying, you saw that in Hollywood movies. They would, they all seem to have these respiratory problems. I don't know what the deal was here, but they would, like kids bringing their lunch to school, they would open up kids' school bags, and just at random, from what I could tell, and they would, peel back the sandwich, for example, and they would all take turns in hacking into it, coughing their bodily fluids into the sandwich, then closing it up and putting it back in the bag, and then they'd stand off at a distance and watch when the kid would bite into the sandwich, and they treat this as some huge, not only funny and enjoyable and great entertainment, but they treat it as some sort of a victory somehow. They'd won the exchange, and I observed this, and they do the same thing with kids, especially in Australia, a hot summer day. A lot of kids would bring drink bottles to school, with cordial or lemonade or something, and that was a favourite to hack bodily fluids into as well. But it's uniquely this group. Others didn't do it. Only them. Only they did it. And other things. I've mentioned this again numerous times before. And they would just pull their pants down and have a crap right in the middle of the floor. This was again something I'd never seen before. And they would drop a turd in the middle of, say, the sports change room. Then they try and grab kids coming in, unsuspecting kids coming in through the door, and try and push them into the turd. And every success was greeted with howls of laughter and delight. And I could go on with examples. The police were around, but this is at a high school, for fuck's sake. The police were around almost every day. So behavioural differences and cultural differences, or the behavioural differences that emanate from the cultural differences, are very serious matters. And I meet people who are from Greek rural families, Italian rural families, or had emigrated to Australia, these Middle Eastern people, Vietnamese, list goes on. They're just not integrating. Now the grandparents, the grandchildren are somewhat integrating, but only through affirmative action programs, only because we've got to have a certain amount of Asian people, or it's only through quotas and only through organisations that don't have to compete for business. As soon as any organisation that has to compete, head to head to win customers, rather than say a takeout food business that only needs cheap labour to get that, but where you're going out proactively to compete with goods and services, those companies, those businesses just can't afford the affirmative action and the quotas and so on. But any business that is trying to get government business is pretty much required to do it. So this has created this artificial, employment level or type of employment, which is tearing the business sector to pieces in terms of wealth creation and merit and quality of management and organisational development. So bringing the people in that don't integrate, the only way to integrate them is to create all these false, ridiculous, unproductive, affirmative action type policies, which means we all pay for it on the backhand rather than the forehand. So again, the cultural compatibility is a key issue to successful immigration. And then, as I say, looking at people who maybe they're not fully or as culturally compatible, but they have exceptional skills or other abilities, experience, credentials, whatever, and then those people can come in. But again, unless you speak good, speak the language. In Australia's case, English, you must speak good English, to high school level. Otherwise, you can't come in. That's that simple. That's it. Yeah. And until those controls and those requirements are put in, no migration system will be successful. And all the failures of Australia's early migration system are tied down to allowing people to come in that don't speak English, that are from culturally incompatible, who have no skills. For example, there are still Greeks, the grandchildren of the people that came to Australia in the 1950s and early 1960s. They in turn have their children there now, and they still perceive themselves as, no, I'm Greek. And you always see the same pattern: rural peasant people coming in who didn't speak a lick of English, and they all congregated. Their numbers were sufficient. They all congregated in an enclave and became a Greek ghetto. Whereas if they had to sprinkle around, they just couldn't have done it. So culturally incompatible people must come in with skills. Otherwise, we're just creating if you like, a disaster scenario, which is in Australia now. We've got a large Chinese community, have very special pleadings. They perceive that any area of Sydney or Australia that they have the majority, it's effectively their country now. That part of Australia is their sort of sub-country. Indians the same, and some of the others. Indians and Chinese being the primary groups, but some of the others also. So this just showed, now this is a time bomb ticking away, and the outcome isn't going to be good. These people are not integrating. Some are, a small number are, 1 or 2%, something like that, but they're just not integrating. And when they came, they couldn't speak English, and they came with no skills, nothing they could offer. So they've been a drag and a cost. And then the again, as I've mentioned, the government and the business sectors had to turn itself inside out with affirmative action type policies to be able to fit these people in. Otherwise, they'd have been a permanent sort of street level underclass. But in order to fit them in, we've had to destroy our society in the process. And it's just not working out. You've been with Taskless today, your pushback channel, and thank you for listening.